welcome to Mic Check, a SRM production in which myself, Zach, and my buddy David talk about NASCAR as well as bridging the gap between that and the sim racing community. So before we get started, say hello to the internet, David.
Welcome, everyone. Good to be here alongside you, Zach. As you mentioned, our production here of Mic Check covering everything from real life NASCAR down to the sim racing that we cover here at SRM. Excited to get into all of it with you, Zach, and couldn't think of a better partner to have alongside.
All right, and I'll take all the compliments you're willing to throw my way, but we have a lot to cover in the week that was in terms of NASCAR. News everywhere. So much news, in fact, that we don't have enough time to cover it all on this show, but certainly we're going to try to cover as much as we can and grant justice to the week that was, especially in NASCAR. And I'm going to first talk to you about the Xfinity race that was at the Charlotte Roval this past week, and really go over with you the top 10 finishers as well as some observations I had with some of these drivers that have gotten unexpected good finishes, as well as those drivers that towards playoff time we expect a push towards a championship. As you can see, this was AJ Allmendinger's contest. He is undefeated in the Roval when it comes to his Xfinity career. He has won every time he stepped into that car, and a really impressive run by Allmendinger as he continues to just put on a show here and really teach that younger generation what's up. Of course, this past week for AJ, there was also news that he will be racing for Colic Racing full-time, the Dinger, back in Cup full-time next season. So really excited to see that momentum from this announcement, this new partnership with Colleague, and he's going to go all out here to try to win this Xfinity Championship before he goes back into NASCAR. Such a unique career for the Dinger. But as we continue to look down the standings, we see names that we're really used to seeing here up front. We have Ty Gibbs and Noah Gregston and Justin Allgaier. Also Brandon Jones and Josh Berry having decent days. And really, the person I want to talk about is the individual who substituted for that Joe Gibbs Racing number 18 ride, James Davison. James Davison has substituted a few times over in the Cup Series on various road course races, and Davison had a really good day in terms of keeping the car in one piece and continuing to move forward in this Xfinity Series event. And ultimately, when you're in that Joe Gibbs 18 ride in the Xfinity Series, it's really, I can only imagine, pressure packed to get a win or finish high. There's a lot of expectations on Trevor Bayne this weekend in Las Vegas as he enters his last start in that 18 ride. And here on the road course, James Davison shows up in a big way. Oftentimes in the Cup Series, he's running Rick Ware equipment, but here in the Xfinity side, he's racing Joe Gibbs top tier stuff, and he comes away with a P4 this week. So shout out to Davison. Maybe this blossoms into some new opportunities this year for him in the Cup Series for next season. And David, I'm gonna hand it off to you as you give us some of your takes. Not all of them, because we're going to talk about some of the playoff drama that exists here in the Cup Series, but take it away here looking at your top 10 for the Roval in what was a really standard race for a long time, and then it wasn't.
So, as you mentioned, a very cut and dry race there for a while here at the Charlotte Roval, and then couple of events, and then definitely some drama that we'll get into, as you mentioned, a little bit later. But looking at our finishing results, we have Christopher Bell there up top, followed by Kevin Harvick in second, Kyle Busch in third. Hey, there's that guy again. The Dinger with Colleague Racing coming in fourth right there. Justin Haley in fifth. Chris Buescher having a pretty good day, coming home in sixth. Bubba Wallace making a strong run for the seventh spot. Tyler Reddick in eighth. Chase Briscoe there in ninth. And then to round out your top 10, we have Austin Dillon. As you mentioned, Zach, fairly cut and dry day throughout most of the race. However, towards the end of this, there was some incidents and drivers really not giving that respect that they were hoping to see from each other towards the end of the race. So made for an interesting weekend as we rounded out our last race there of the round of 12, looking forward to the round of 8 as they head towards Vegas as well this week.
Yeah, and as I fade into existence here on the show, but there are a few takeaways from this particular race that will affect the playoffs, and we're going to get into that. But I do want to talk about some non-playoff storylines here in this race, just to really do justice to a lot of the drivers that aren't racing for a championship but are racing for good days. It seems that it's been forever since we've seen Kyle Busch string together a couple decent days. He's had such a tumultuous season, and yet Kyle Busch up there getting that top 5 finish, and really he didn't really do anything special. The Toyota struggled most of the day, and Kyle just survived at the end of a really chaotic race and brought that car home in the top 5. Another individual that had a very similar day was Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace was racing back with the Rick Wares of the world and the partial time individuals who come in and race these road courses, and he struggled a lot during the day. And on the Door Bumper Clear podcast, his spotter even said, we didn't even know how to pass people at this place, because with this new car and understanding low mile per hour markers, it's just really hard to pass because there's more dirty air and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Well, here we saw that if you stay in the back, you keep a clean race car, and you chug along, you might have a shot for a top 10. A couple of these guys here in the top 10 did exactly that. And a guy who isn't normally great on road courses gets a top 10 here. So congrats to Bubba Wallace. And remember, he's racing for that owner's championship in the 45. So there's certainly a lot to race for if you are him. And a day like today is really big for that team.
Absolutely. Making sure to keep their nose clean, getting those points where they can get them. And as you mentioned, sometimes that's all it takes for somebody like Kyle Busch, who has, as you mentioned, had just an absolutely horrible season compared to his normal results. Coming out and being able to get that top 5, making it all string together there, and having a good day at the Roval.
Yeah, and we really see these drivers be patient throughout the day and ultimately capitalize on what can only be described as chaos towards the end of this thing, and really put together a decent finish. And that's what we're going to talk about next here on the show, some NASCAR playoff drama. And there was certainly a lot of, disruptions towards the end of this race. We saw a sign fall off a wall and impact the racing groove with 5 laps to go. Chase Elliott was on his way to securing a second win in a row in a season that's been so difficult for drivers to string together wins. At the very least, there was going to be a battle between him and the Dinger, but that never happened because the field got slinkied back up and every fan knew what was going to happen on the ensuing restarts, because everybody knew there was going to be more than one. It was complete chaos from the very front of the pack all the way to the back. You had people dive bombing. You had people just missing the chicanes. You had folks running people out of the way. Very similar to what we saw at the Indy road course earlier this year. Maybe not as egregious, but certainly mayhem breaks loose here. And a storyline that the NBC broadcast caught was a story that circled around the playoff cut line. And of course, you're going to be covering the playoff cut line towards the end of this thing because this is a playoff cut line race. And some of the drivers involved were Kyle Larson, who had mechanical issues that plagued his race. Daniel Suarez lost power steering about halfway through this one. He had to muscle that car around the racetrack. It was certainly a gutsy performance by him. Austin Cindric, the rookie, trying to advance, trying to be the first rookie ever into the round of 8. That would have been very impressive. And for a while, he had it in the bag. And then we get to Chase Briscoe. And Chase Briscoe played some strategy late. In fact, he spun out on a late what do we call that? Like a late restart. I guess we should just call it what it is. He got wrecked and he fell towards the back of the pack, went down pit road, pitted, got fresh rubber, and started making his way back towards the front. And then it became very evident that there was a clip captured on the broadcast where during the white flag lap where Briscoe was tied with Kyle Larson in the points, but the tiebreaker goes to the best finish in the round, which would be Briscoe. We see out of nowhere his teammate Cole Custer drop like a rock and become a rolling roadblock to about 4 or 5 drivers in order for Chase to get on by his Stewart-Haas teammate. Now, that resulted in some hefty penalties from NASCAR this week. And David, if you can share with the viewers just exactly what did the sanctioning body level down on Stewart-Haas Racing and Cole Custer's team for effectively manipulating the end of this race?
So for their attempt at manipulation, of course, NASCAR took a look at the incident as a whole, had plenty of footage, and of course the in-race audio from those drivers, and they decided that there indeed was a violation here. Something had to be done. So in order to address that, the 41 machine was deducted 50 driver points as well as 50 owner points for code of conduct and performance obligation violations. So didn't get super specific on those, but everybody, of course, knows what happened during that time of the race and definitely the things that could have transpired had that not occurred. And then Cole Custer himself being fined $100,000, and then crew chief for the 41 machine also being fined and $100,000 fine there and suspended indefinitely. So the reason the crew chief, of course, getting involved here, the 41 machine was heading into that back chicane, and the crew chief comes over the radio and is telling the 41 machine there that, hey, I think you have a flat tire. Slow down, check up. And of course, if you know the Roval and you know the visibility from the front stretch to the rear chicane there's no way that a crew chief could have seen any of those tires going down on that machine. So NASCAR, of course, taking that penalty just a little bit farther and applying it to the crew chief there for his part in this whole fiasco. Zach, interested to hear your thoughts. See if I missed anything there.
I don't think so. I think you did a pretty good job at recapping what was. There is a lot of anger within the NASCAR community. Tony Stewart came out this past week and said, I'm not even going to waste my time and physically go to the appeal process, right? He's jokingly said on Twitter he's looking for a new hobby, particularly something that's less stressful and more fun. And he really dug into NASCAR this past week and he rightfully so. I mean, NASCAR over the last 2 weeks has fined Stewart-Haas Racing $300,000. They got rid of 2 crew chiefs, one indefinitely. David, we don't even know when the crew chief for the 41 is going to come back. could be into next season. We don't know. Obviously, this rule is put in place because of the Michael Waltrip racing incident all those years ago in the playoffs, manipulating the end of the race. NASCAR, of course, doesn't want that to happen again, but the angst from the racing community is, where's the consistency when it comes to penalizing these teams for effectively team orders? We have situations all throughout, even in the past couple years, of drivers sandbagging so that others might be able to succeed. I think of this week's winner, Eric Jones, of sandbagging at Martinsville a few years ago. The team getting on the radio saying, don't pass Denny, he's got to advance. He held up about 10 other drivers for the last portion of that Martinsville race in the fall so that Denny could advance. I think of earlier 2 years ago. Excuse me, I'm getting all flustered. 1 year ago at Bristol, the origin story of the Chase Elliott Kevin Harvick feud, where Elliott goes on to the racetrack and doesn't race at 100%, some would argue, and he hangs in front of the race leader so that his teammate might be able to win, in Kyle Larson. And in fact, Larson did win that Bristol night race. And obviously the fans are upset at this development because there's no consistency. We don't know what to expect from the sanctioning body, and ultimately Stewart-Haas is putting all their resources in appealing this, right? This is a devastating penalty for this team. Custer's had a pretty bad year in terms of performance. We expect that Haas machine to really do well. He obviously continues to have a ride there based on his connections with ownership. But if you're going to help the team, how about you go out and perform a little more, right? Try to go out there and win a few races or something, because this kind of help, my personal opinion is, it's not warranted in the sport. You have to earn your spots on the racetrack, and ultimately Chase Briscoe, at the time of that happening, was tied with Kyle Larson. We don't know what would have happened on the final lap if people just raced 100%. So that's my opinion on the matter. What about you?
I definitely share the same sentiment. I believe that drivers should 100% earn their spot in every single round of the playoffs. Nothing should be given, and team orders out the window. You know, I'm one of those people. You've known me from racing in the sim, of course. Team orders or not, I'm going out there and I'm doing what I know I can do. I want to get that performance. And as you mentioned, Custer a bit lackluster this year. So for him to do anything but his best performance, I think that just hurts him and his future within the sport. Granted, he does have those connections at Stewart-Haas, so he's not truly worried about losing that seat, but it does bring into question the integrity of him as a driver. And then overall, you're definitely not going to make friends with those other drivers, especially somebody like Kyle Larson, who you may have just cost him his playoff spot.
He did.
So definitely some things to keep in mind.
He did, and one could make the argument. The reason why Kyle Larson is not racing for a second championship in a row, right? This is a guy who's on a title defense run. It could be made that the reason why he's not being able to do that is because of this incident. But I'm very curious to see over the next few weeks what Stewart-Haas does in order to go to the appeals board and try to fight this. I think that this appeals board, it exists outside of NASCAR, so it's not like NASCAR is going against themselves to try to rescind this penalty. This is a board that exists outside of the sport, so representatives from NASCAR and representatives from Haas is going to come and debate their case. So I'm very interested to see what happens. Ultimately, it does not change the running order for the playoffs, and Chase Briscoe's in. And in fact, Chase Briscoe now is the underdog of the 8 remaining drivers to continue in the playoffs. David, if you had to pick uh, a, a a Final Four preview. Uh, where do you think you're gonna land?
So just taking a look down through our names here, of course, one of the favorites that I think everybody at this point can really pick out and say, I feel strong and confident in saying that he will make it to the Final Four. Chase Elliott had a great year. As you mentioned, for this race, he was on his way to be able to go back to back. That says something, especially in a year where multiple winners um, arose just due to the fact that it was so hard to string together these wins. Then you look at the name right below him. So Chase Elliott, of course, being our leader heading into this next round. Joey Logano, here's another veteran driver. Had some pretty good finishes. Strong name that I would choose to be as part of our Final Four. But those last two spots, just so hard to pick names. And as I'm looking down through our championship 8 here, the difference from the cut line to Chase Briscoe, as we mentioned, being that last driver to squeak his way in there, just 9 points. So really, even with Chase Briscoe not having the best odds, I truly say that these last two spots are up for grabs for anyone, and that certainly doesn't make Chase Elliott or Joey Logano safe. Chase Elliott being 31 points above the line right now, Logano being at plus 11. I expect them to have good finishes to maintain those spots, but by no means are they an absolute guarantee at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been noted quite often that Chase Elliott has not started either one of these rounds in the playoffs very strong. In fact, he's had abysmal first few races, and he has had to use his extra playoff points to prevent him sliding out of each round. So, be curious to see if that befalls him again this week at Las Vegas, a track that he's historically not very comfortable with. He actually said in a post race interview, "I hate Las Vegas. I'm not excited to go there," and it's going to be interesting. It really is to see who's going to battle this out and notch their spot here in the Final Four. We're going to move on to our third topic here of the show today and talk about some developing news that, for full transparency, is still existing in the ether as speculation. This report has come out early this week that Tyler Reddick has been bought out of his contract with Richards Childress Racing. The details of that are still unknown. And so you take that news and you juxtapose it with a couple events that we do know for sure is happening this weekend. One is an interview from Kurt Busch. He's scheduled a press conference at Las Vegas, his home track. It's very public. His love for racing out there and being able to go back to Nevada and connect with the home crowd. He does that every year. He seems to run a throwback paint scheme to his early days of racing almost every time they go to Vegas this time of year. And he's very passionate about those folks. But there's a press conference from him that's scheduled on Saturday to come out and talk, as well as a scheduled press conference from 2311 is also scheduled this weekend. So the stars are aligning, and unfortunately, the signs, at least for me, and you're going to share your thoughts here on this momentarily, but on the surface, it does seem like there is some warrant to this Tyler Reddick news about him not racing for Richard Childress next year and instead hopping over to 2311 a year early in lieu of what would possibly be a Kurt Busch retirement announcement this week. How do you feel about all those stars aligning? And then we'll talk about Kurt a little bit more in depth.
So just going through all of those little intricate things, and of course, I think we talked about it a while ago. The seat in the 8 car, of course, already being promised to another driver for next season.
Oh,
So
oh, you mean the most popular free agent driver of the last decade, a certain Kyle Busch getting signed over there? You can't just gloss over it's Kyle Busch getting signed over it. I digress. I digress. There, yeah, I'll let you have it. Here you go.
of course, Kyle getting signed over to the 8 machine there. Questions for the future of Reddick for next season, of course, being questionable with this move to 2311 looming at the end of next season. RCR and Reddick just not really having that great relationship this year that would really indicate that they want to keep him for that season next year. Just all these things coming together. I know you and I have talked about it privately. I feel the same way you do. It's the writing on the wall. Of course, we have talked previously about Kurt Busch as well, his recovery, all the things that he has done to get back into the race car, and really just showing that it's his schedule, it's his timeline. If he feels ready, I certainly have no doubts that he would be the first person to climb back in that car and finish out the season strong. However, with this press conference also being with a 2311 press conference here at Las Vegas, it being the hometown, I know words that you had mentioned to me. You don't just schedule a press conference to say, "Hey, everybody, here I am, I'm back." Um, for a name that has been in this sport for so long, we anticipate this to be some large news. Unfortunately, we may have seen the last of Kurt racing in the sport, but that does open the door and open opportunities for these younger drivers, in this case, Tyler Reddick, to move over to 2311 a bit early, start forming those bonds with the team. And then, of course, by the time he should arrive to 2311 racing there in 2023, he could have that good rapport and already some insight into how these cars handle from 2311. Hard to say what's going to happen, but we'll have to keep an eye on it, Zach.
Yeah, and it's certainly a developing story in which we are going to keep our eyes on. Just if this is the end for Kurt Busch, I do want to talk a little bit about him because what a unique, prosperous career that had everything that a NASCAR driver could go through, right? Some would argue that Kurt Busch was brought into this sport a little prematurely, and he was this young kid, and it's been well documented. His teammates thought that Kurt walked around with this attitude that the world owed him everything, and winning a championship early on in your career certainly doesn't help that condition. We'll put it that way. And ultimately, that led him out of his relationship with Roush Racing, a very successful career, lands him in a Penske ride, racing for that historic Blue Deuce. And we saw a great relationship slowly deteriorate between problems on and off the track. Ultimately, he landed at the bottom of the barrel in the sport, racing for Phoenix Racing, an underfunded, underutilized team that Kurt himself has said was a terrible work environment, not conducive for his health. And ultimately, he had to take a good look in the mirror and say, who do I want to be? Am I going to come back from this? Gets signed with Stewart-Haas Racing, rides out a successful stint there, and ultimately ends up racing for Toyota, finally, racing for all the manufacturers that NASCAR has had during his tenure, and races for Toyota for a short season. But David, he won a race, and he was looking very strong. Kurt Busch, it's not talked about enough, was a championship contender this year. He walked into this organization, started doing things at a very high level. And I think seeing the growth of Bubba Wallace, right, as 2311 has continued to grow this year, how much more growth could we have expected from Kurt this year? How many wins has he missed out on in this later part of the season? Because 2311's really clicking now. ultimately, uh, it's a very unique career, but it's made known very clearly. He's one of the more respected guys in the garage now. He's an elder statesman of the sport. A lot of people throw that term around, and he's an advocate for men's health and men's mental health, rather, and being able to be a voice for the young drivers. Uh, heck of a career from Kurt Busch. If this really is the end, we've seen a truly great career. And it was mentioned earlier today. I think NASCAR Radio mentioned it, where Kurt Busch is the last driver in the NASCAR Cup Series to race with Dale Earnhardt Sr. And so this is the closing of that era of NASCAR, if this really is the end. All right, and we're gonna continue on here in the show with some iRacing news. This is a portion of our show here on Mike Check where we do want to talk about what's been going on lately in the iRacing community, and there's no other storyline, right, than what's happening right now in the Coca-Cola or the eNASCAR Coca-Cola series. And this field needed to have a Final Four, and this past week, man, did we see a crazy effort brought out by the drivers of this series, and it really fostered a great finishing result, and ultimately the Final Four was set. Stuart Haas esports driver Steven Wilson, he entered the 2022 eNASCAR series playoffs as the winningest driver in the regular season, but this past week he was on the outside looking in, and ultimately he needed to survive some late race chaos and being able to maneuver his way through the field. Through a few overtimes, he was able to come out on top and be the final cutoff spot going into the Final Four here. We have Steven Wilson, Casey Kerwin, Graham Bolin, and Bobby Zielinski making their way into the Final Four here at some Coca-Cola eNASCAR series action. So, David, knowing what you know about the Final Four and given their success, who are you looking forward to maybe hoisting that championship belt at the end of this season?
All the races that I have seen, all the things they do, I've seen his name around quite a bit. Steven Wilson, 4 wins already this year, 8 top 5s, 11 top 10s. I believe he has to be the favorite with this particular set of drivers for our championship 4. Of course, I am a Joe Gibbs Racing fan. Going to be rooting there for Bobby Zielinski, but I think Steven Wilson has a pretty good chance here, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if I saw him snag that championship.
All right. Well, I agree. So you've said everything that I was gonna say, and kudos to the Final Four. Congratulations. We here at Sim Racing Media are rooting for you to have a great time of preparation as you get ready for the final race of the eNASCAR Coca-Cola Series season. And congratulations to all the competitors in that series. It takes a lot of talent to be at the highest form of NASCAR racing in the iRacing sphere, and just being in the field, that's a huge success story for any sim racers. So we certainly enjoy watching those every time you come out on the racetrack. For a couple of novice drivers here, we really look forward to seeing the best of the best duke it out on circuits that we drive on. And ultimately, that's what iRacing does really well, is creating a community of racers that are just excited to view racing. So this week, we're going to take a look towards what's going on here on Sim Racing Media. David, you had the opportunity to participate in a broadcast this week. Why don't you talk to us about that league that you were covering this past week in the broadcast booth?
this week, the opportunity arose to hop into one of our broadcast booths alongside one of our other crew members and really dive on in. So we covered the World 600 for the SCL, the Sunday Cup League. What a great race, great racing, and it was there at Charlotte, but not the Charlotte we're used to seeing. This was the throwback 2008 Charlotte before the safer barriers, the bumpier track. So we definitely got to see these next gen cars take on something that, of course, hasn't existed for quite some time. And it made for some great racing. Track temperatures around 78 degrees. We expected these cars to have grip, but they were sliding around all night long. Drivers side by side, made for some great action. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, it is over on our YouTube channel here with SRM.
All right. Well, certainly keep an eye out on that particular series, as well as the multitude of other series that provide great racing along different driving disciplines that Sim Racing Media winds up covering. You can follow Sim Racing Media on Facebook and Twitter, and being able to follow them on both of those platforms will keep you well informed over what the company is doing and what we're doing to broadcast some really competitive leagues in the iRacing season. So my hope for you, as a fly comes around here, goodness, my hope for you is that you are excited for real world racing as well as the sim racing community moving into the week to come. But that's all the time we have on today's show. And for my partner David, my name is Zach, and can I get a mic check? Until we meet again, keep on racing. We'll talk to you guys real soon. Bye.